Hello, welcome to the conversation in News Central Television. This is a program where we bring you up to speed with all the political happenings on the African continent. I am Benga Aboroa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Now, today on the conversation, we will be looking at the ongoing controversies surrounding the U.S. ambassador to South Africa's accusation of South Africa shipping weapons to Russian cargo vessel last year.
And also on the program today, we will be looking at the political situation in Ghana. The largest opposition party, the National Democratic Congress, officially appointed former president of Ghana, John Mahama, as a flag bearer of the party.
Interesting situations in Ghana. We're seeing a former president after going about 3 times and lost twice. And once again, he's saying, I will be ready. And the party too has chosen him as a candidate for the NDC.
And he does have a strong chance of emerging president, because if you feel the pulse in Ghana, not a lot of people are happy with the current government of President Nana Akufo-Addo. They felt he promised a lot and delivered little. So I look forward to having that conversation later on.
Definitely, I look forward to it. I mean, elections are December, so let's see what the NPP or the NDC can do before that time. Meanwhile, I know we had conversations in South Africa, the accusations on Friday, and then we are seeing the ambassador, Brigadier, apologizing to South Africa for the statement that he made. But
a fast-developing situation, but apologies for the statement or apologies for false accusation.
I believe it's just for the statement.
Okay,
because he hasn't said, but we'll definitely get to find out.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. The recent controversy surrounding allegations of South Africa supplying weapons to Russia has led to high-level discussions between South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor and U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. United States claim initially made by Ambassador Ruben Brigatti suggested that weapons and ammunition were loaded onto the Russian cargo ship, the Lady R, at a South African naval base. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa expressed disappointment with Brigitti's handling of the situation, and the government had announced plans for an independent inquiry led by a retired judge to investigate the allegations. The US and South Africa engaging in dialogue to address the issue and preserve their important bilateral relationship.
South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana revealed that the U.S. had previously expressed suspicions about weapons being loaded onto the Russian ship, and that the government had been informed by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in February. In response, President Ramaphosa expressed disappointment in Brigitti's undiplomatic approach, emphasizing the need for cooperative and constructive engagement between the two countries. The South African government intends to conduct an independent inquiry to ascertain the facts surrounding the allegations and address the concerns raised. As the situation unfolds, further diplomatic efforts and investigations are expected to take place to rebuild trust and strengthen the U.S.-South Africa relationship. And joining us for this conversation, we have Lowazi Semir, a senior researcher at Southern African Liaison Office, Johannesburg, South Africa. We also have Saul Molobi, a business publisher, consultant, and commentator. He joins us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
All right, I'm going to begin with Lowazi, and we're looking at the specific evidence or intelligence that prompted the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigatti, to make the serious accusations against South Africa regarding the alleged loading of weapons onto a sanctioned Russian ship, the Lady R, in December 2022. What exactly were the indications or the evidence raised by the U.S. ambassador?
We must realize that the Russian naval ship is sanctioned by the United States of America and not necessarily by the broader international community. And South Africa, based on its non-validate unilateral sanctions, as in similar incidences like the acts against sanctions against Zimbabwe. So what has happened is that this a carrier ship moved from the port of Cape Town, and it switched off its signal. After switching off its signal, it was next seen in Simonstown, which is the naval capital of South Africa. There are reports that the ship offloaded goods at the naval port, but there are allegations by the U.S. ambassador that the ship also onboarded arms and ammunition. Now, there were 3 instances where the U.S. government has presented this matter. The first one was when U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen came to South Africa and met up with the finance minister and raised this issue about the ship, and that was earlier on this year. The second one was raised when South Africa deployed an envoy to discuss South Africa's future within the AGOA Act and the future diplomatic relations between South Africa and the USA. And now the third one is a week after the envoy had been deployed, when the ambassador made a public statement in the form of a press conference, not allowing time for the envoy to process their mission. And therefore, this is why there has been a lot of mistrust and a lot of feedback against the ambassador of the USA, Ruben Brigitte, concerning how he has handled the matter and not bringing it up the diplomatic channels that he's supposed to. So this has also been an issue of diplomatic protocol, where the ambassador has chosen to take it up with the media instead of engaging on a bilateral basis with the South African government. Not been known to the ambassador, the president had already set up, was already planning to set up a commission of inquiry led by a retired judge. Now, there are many questions on the efficacy of such a commission of inquiry, judging from the record of commission of inquiries of South Africa. But in this instance, it's merely an exercise to validate or to dismiss and to ensure international confidence in South Africa's national security processes, and also to highlight if there was arms transportation within that naval base that was not captured in the National Convention on Conventional Arms Committee and the list on exported arms. It would mean there's a criminal organization that's operating in a naval base, and that is a far more greater issue to worry about in terms of national security for South Africa and its national interest.
Thank you, Luwazi. I'd like to bring Saul Molobi into the conversation. Now, Saul, Luwazi did mention that it was one of the steps that the South African government announced, setting up of an independent panel of inquiry. Now, regarding the upcoming independent inquiry to be led by a retired judge, what mechanism will be put in place to ensure its transparency, objectivity, and integrity, and how will the findings be communicated to public and the relevant stakeholders? Why is it important for South Africa to do this, or is it irrelevant?
Let me just respond by saying that indeed the presidency will develop terms of reference for this commission of inquiry. And our constitution is reputed as one of the best because we do respect separation of powers. We have a very strong judiciary, which is also highly independent. So that will give credence and reputation to the entire process. Having said that, I would say personally, I don't think that's the best route for us as a country to follow. One, we have an arms control committee that regulates purchasing of arms by South Africa and also selling of arms by South Africa. And that committee reports into Parliament. And beyond that, I was to say, this is a security intelligence matter. And in Parliament, we do have a multi-party committee on intelligence. So if I was the president, I was simply to say this is a security intelligence matter, and it will be investigated by the parliamentary committee. And that parliamentary committee is very legitimate because it represents all parties that are represented in Parliament. Again, I would say, who is the US to tell us that we need to investigate this matter and go back to them with answers? Our global icon, Nelson Mandela, was on record saying that the US has committed atrocities and instability across the world, and no one has ever held them accountable. Just last year, the US passed an act that indicated that the ICC, it dared the ICC actually to say you don't investigate any of our armed forces in all the conflicts that we've been involved in. So in that instance, I was to say South Africa doesn't owe them any answers.
So permit me to come in at this point. The United States of America and the Republic of South Africa do quite a lot of business, and South Africa is a beneficiary of the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, AGOA. There's also talks of, you know, if this arms deal happened, or if this arms exchange happened, that it will be violating South Africa's own stance of neutrality and non-alignment in siding with the Russian side. So don't you think that's a big enough? Because when this thing was announced, the South African rand lost its value, and it did affect stocks. So there has to be serious implications and consequences. And yes.
Yes, we have already felt the consequences because our currency, as you mentioned, lost its value by 5%. But I'm saying we have constitutional mechanisms that we were supposed to resort to in order to investigate this matter. We don't need an independent commission headed by a retired judge to investigate that, because it's a security matter. So that's my position. But the other thing is that South Africa's foreign policy is standing on two principles. One is consolidating its relations with countries of the North, and secondly, to strengthen our South-South cooperation. And this is where we should look at BRICS within this context. If I was to borrow from classical literature, I would say there's a specter haunting countries of the North, and it is the specter of BRICS, because it doesn't require a scientist to link the allegations to South Africa hosting the BRICS summit in August, and also with the obvious known fact that President Putin will be attending. And in fact, the envoys that went to the US last week, over the weekend, on Sunday, they had a press conference where they indicated that it wasn't, their mission wasn't necessarily about AGOA, but it was about, broadly speaking, relations between South Africa and the US. And yes, granted, the US is our biggest investor. We have over 600 American companies in South Africa. Yeah. They invest 400 billion. Yes, we can't risk that. But again, historically, we do have a sound relationship with the Democratic Party in the US. And for that reason, I would say they also need to look at our historical ties with them. And they also need to understand that we have adopted a non-aligned stance with regards to the Russia-Ukraine war.
All right, thank you so much, Saul. I'm going to bring Luaz into all of this because earlier on you talked about diplomatic protocol. So first of all, there was a statement, there was an apology, but before that, we also saw repercussions. I mean, the image of South Africa being put in a bad light. How is South Africa planning to mitigate all of this and deal with the repercussions of this statement that we had, and even the potential independent inquiry that we might see after all of this?
So first and foremost, the ambassador apologized on the basis that the way that he conducted himself in terms of addressing these matters that were already before the table. However, this also speaks to a lot of issues that the current ambassador to the United States has done within the South Africa. So last year, there was a warning of a potential terror attack that didn't come to fruition within South Africa. Then he launched an attack on the African National Congress, the governing party in South Africa, and newspapers. And now this incident where he goes to the media and does this. So there have been a number of incidences with this ambassador that the South African government is not very happy about. And for good reasons. As we have known historically, the USA has plotted false flag operations and creating narratives as a pretext for greater things, such as the pretext towards the invasion of Iraq in 2003, towards the elimination of Saddam Hussein, elimination of Gaddafi in Libya, and various other aspects of international relations. The major problem with South Africa is that taking up on a non-aligned stance is a very, very tricky position to hold. And part and parcel of this position to hold of non-alignment is to carefully playing the balancing act between the two actors that have an interest towards your foreign policy and what you do going forward. The commission of inquiry is also very important that the president is hosting. And I fully agree with my fellow panelists that it's unnecessary, but for diplomatic reasons, the president has thought that in order for us to reaffirm the criminal justice system within South Africa, and along with our lines of accountability, there was a need for an independent panel that not only the international community can trust, but also domestically we can investigate what really happened. But there are also far-reaching other aspects of this, such as how does South Africa now collaborate with U.S. intelligence services based on a national intelligence matter, which now compromises South Africa's national intelligence, and how does South Africa now deal with the lack of capacity issues of dealing with this matter at a broader national intelligence matter, from the military intelligence units to the South African Navy, which is host of the Summons Town Port, to even the South African National Defense and also the Minister of Defense, in accounting on what really happened. And this could have easily been rebuffed by the president, presented with evidence, and also a little bit more openness with the citizenry and along with the international community would have gone a long way in order to calming the diplomatic brouhaha created by the ambassador. Also, what is really important from the press conference that was released earlier on, both sides acknowledged the very importance of this relationship between South Africa and the United States, and they both plan on working on it. It's similar to in all relationships, will come turbulent times, even though there's a Democratic Party government within the United States that was aligned to the anti-apartheid movement. There are turbulent times within this relationship between the United States under the Biden administration, along with African governments that have chosen a non-aligned stance. So that is the quagmire South Africa currently faces.
Yes, and talking about this quagmire, Saul, South Africa finds itself in a very precarious situation where it has to, do this diplomatic juggling act of, keeping its allies happy, the Russians on one side and the South Africans on and the Americans on the other side. So how do you advise the South African government to approach this very important relationships with historical ties also in a way that the South African government is not compromised and they're not getting the short end of any of these relationships, and keep them happy? I mean, on one side, they're part of the BRICS. They will be hosting the summit later on this year. And then on the other side, they have this very important business and diplomatic relationship with the United States, like you highlighted earlier. How will they balance this juggling act, this diplomatic juggling act?
So non-alignment is a very, very, very...
sorry, that question is directed to Saul.
Yeah.
Yes, the US and Europe have to understand that the foundations of our post-1994 dispensation is based on negotiated settlement in pursuit of peace. But secondly, we also believe in reaching out to all stakeholders, including your opponents, and in this instance, not necessarily your enemies. And we have always been part of the non-aligned movement from our anti-apartheid struggle days. Now, for that reason, that's why whenever violence or war erupts anywhere, South Africa will always call for peace, to say warring parties need to come to a negotiating table. And this is the role that we are playing currently, even here in Africa. If you look at South Africa's role in mediating in the DRC, in Ethiopian opponents negotiated their peace here in South Africa between the federal government and Tigray. And right now, people are even saying South Africa needs to be more involved in Sudan. And they're saying this showing confidence in us because historically, we have played a role in bringing peace between warring parties. You look at the DRC, at Sudan, South Africa was always there. Now, South Africa has to reconfirm its position that it values its relationship with countries of the North. But at the same time, it also has to emphasize that as a developing nation, it always has to side with developing countries. Because South Africa has been calling for the transformation of the international system. South Africa has called for the transformation of the IMF, of the World Bank, the two Bretton Woods Institute. South Africa has called for the transformation of the United Nations. And South Africa is basically saying, allow us equal status in all international mechanisms so that our voices as countries of the North, as developing and least developed nations, our voices could be heard. And this is our position.
I would like Luwazi also to speak on this because everybody's wondering how neutral South Africa has been on this issue of Ukraine war. We've seen the military engagement with Russia, and we also know the stance of Russia, how he's trying to, or the country is trying to gain allies with United States and Britain all falling back with this Ukraine war. So how exactly has South Africa demonstrated its neutrality with all these positions and meetings with the Russian president and Russia as a whole?
So,
in fact, if we're to
all right,
unpack the
sorry, Saul, I want Luwazi to quickly speak on this, please.
Yeah. There is a difference between non-alignment and neutrality. Neutrality is an international law definition, while non-alignment is a political position one takes in international politics. So a country that is non-aligned can engage with both actors. This is why it positions South Africa as the great interlocutor in terms of dialogue between these two actors. And this is why South Africa has offered to play a mediation role within the conflict, including with the assistance of Brazil, which is also a non-aligned movement member. However, the problem that has been that is at stake currently is the perceptions. As soon as the perceptions that of your non-alignment is non-existing, the international community tends to have a lot of mistrust. So what has happened that has created a lot of mistrust, the naval-based exercises that happened last year between Russia and China on the first anniversary of the war, that also put into question South Africa's issue of non-alignment. Another issue of non-alignment is youth league members of the governing party are going to monitor what is internationally regarded as an illegal referendum within Russia. That put into question whether the governing party is non-aligned or not, and also other continuing engagements, including this latest issue of the Lady R shipment, bringing into question South Africa's non-alignment. Now, there are also other factors, such as the allegations that the South Africa's military general is currently in Russia to deliberate on closer cooperation in terms of the military between South Africa and Russia in terms of military readiness. And these reports are now emanating from the media. However, what has fundamentally happened is that these media assertions, not only made by the West, but also the investigative journalists, have not been substantiated and provided evidence for, and therefore South Africa itself is brought into question, and its positionality on non-alignment is put into question to either create a pretext for sanctions or other our unilateral measures that the West can take in terms of putting South Africa in line in terms of the ambitions in the international community. So all these matters, and therefore this encourages South Africa to have something called a more sophisticated non-alignment positions called active non-alignment, which President Ramaphosa has started doing. So on the first day, 3 days ago,
Luwazi, I'm afraid we're out of time. Yeah. I really wish we could go on, but I'd like to say thank you to you, Luwazi Samia, senior researcher, South African Liaison Office, joining live from Johannesburg, and also Saul Malobi, business publisher, consultant, and commentator. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your insights and contributions to the program. I will definitely be monitoring the situation in South Africa with regards to the lady out. Thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.